Entrepreneur, author, and financial consultant Mark Bernstein helps high-performing entrepreneurial business owners create a vision for the future and follow through on their goals and intentions. Ange Honorato is a business growth strategist who blends psychology and business together to create conscious leaders and business owners who impact the world. Founders Forum is a radio show podcast sharing the real stories behind entrepreneurship as founders discover more about themselves while providing valuable lessons and some fun and entertainment for you. Now, here's Mark and Ange.
Good morning, America. Good morning, Philadelphia. Good morning, Wisconsin. Since we have Steve Penkala on with us today, coming from Wisconsin, and we'll introduce him formally in a few minutes, but Ange, we were talking, we actually did a show earlier today, and we were talking about the Phillies loss last night, and we thought that was the beginning of a Philadelphia sports dynasty, and hopefully it still is, but it's hard to see that on the day after. But we got talking about the difference between dynasty and legacy. And so you were talking about dynasty and thought we would talk about that, but talk about your definition of the difference between a dynasty and a legacy, and then we can apply that to Wisconsin as well.
Yeah, so I was driving into the studio today, just completely crushed and devastated. Did not expect that we would be talking about not going to the World Series, right? And I had to eat
my words on the radio that the Phillies were going to win the World Series.
Well, the whole city did, but I was really feeling it, and I kind of thought, I had an hour drive in, and I'm thinking, I grew up with this. My grandparents were huge fans. My mom's a huge fan to this day. She's got season tickets. I was at Game 6, trying to process everything. And on the radio, the local guys were talking about, this really does stink, but the owner of the Phillies wants to ensure that we're building a dynasty. And it got me thinking that we didn't win this one, right? But what is the difference between a legacy and a dynasty? And for me, it was like, I think they can be interchangeable sometimes, but a legacy is kind of what you leave behind, where a dynasty, I feel like, is the foundation of what are you building on top of, right? And never settling for complacency or even a moderate level of success, that it's constantly building an innovation above that. And it helped me process this loss by thinking, all right, we didn't win this one, but are we really built to be a dynasty? Are we going to look back in 2 generations like they did in the 80s with the Phillies, or our guest Steve here is going to talk about his dynasty of the Packers? What does that really mean? And how does that tie into business and life and just that constant striving? And so I'm hurting today, but I'm feeling like, all right, we're just going to build back better for next year. I think that's the best way to think of it.
I'll just mention that I was a partner in a company for a long time that really built quite a dynasty, was always number one in the industry for a long, long time. But something happened along the way to the culture where I don't believe there is going to be that legacy, although it had been a dynasty. And I think that happens. You can see that with sports teams as well. So speaking of which, let's talk about the Green Bay Packers for a minute, since Steve's from Wisconsin and a Packers fan. How would you view that conversation in regard to the Packers?
We hear that. By the way, good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for being here, Steve.
Yeah, that's a word we hear about a lot, or we've heard that word a lot in this state because of the Packers, a dynasty. And I'll be honest, Brett Favre had a good run, Aaron Rodgers had a good run, and now everybody's ready to throw in the towel. This young guy, Jordan Love, they want to give up on him already.
Who I think's amazing, by the way.
Yeah, right.
And it sounds like you live in Philadelphia, because that's what they do here too.
They give up pretty easily. Yeah. So I mean, that's a very near and dear to my heart. That word dynasty. How do I apply that to my business guys? Well, I guess I don't look at Binding Edge as a dynasty, more so as a go-to. As the market has changed in our industry, we're kind of one of the last guys standing. And so I guess I don't look at us as a dynasty. I love the other thought too of legacy. What am I leaving behind? And that's a big responsibility. I think about that. And it's not just a paper converting, book binding, manufacturing company, but what type of company am I leaving behind? What is a legacy to continue to support and encourage people and help them grow and be desires to come to work and make a difference. And that's really what I think about, is what type of legacy. And that is, to me, is more of an impactful thought than a dynasty, I guess.
So, Steve, I know you don't do a lot of these shows, but you just did a beautiful transition. So really appreciate that.
Like a professional.
I thought you were going to probably yell at me.
No, really well done. So listen, let me officially introduce Steve Penkala now. He is the founder and owner of Binding Edge Inc. and Quality Coil. He has 47 years experience in the printing, graphic finishing, and paper converting industry, and has experience in that business ranging from machine operation, sales management, business ownership, pretty much everything you can do in the printing and paper conversion industries, I would think. And his ultimate goal is to integrate his faith into the workplace, and with the desire to have an eternal impact on those who he works alongside, which he just referenced actually in that great transition. So officially welcome, Steve. And I'd like to start out asking you a little bit about how you got there. How did you become the founder and owner of Binding Edge?
Oh gosh, I just think about my childhood years growing up in Wisconsin, Appleton, Wisconsin. My grandfather, my father, and my two uncles, all of them worked for the same company, a printing and publishing company, in various roles, management for some, machine operation for others. And so early on, I knew about the industry, and for whatever reason, it intrigued me. When I was 16, we still had co-op classes in high school, and there was woodworking, there was metals. Well, I took a printing co-op, which meant half the day I was in my class, the other half I'd go out in the community. In my case, I ran a printing press at a local hospital. And that experience, I learned early that I was not a machine operator. I was terrible at it. I didn't know what I was doing. I wanted to master it so much that I convinced my parents to go out and buy a small press, and they put it in our basement in our home so I could run this thing. Mm-hmm. And for Christmas, I would run business cards and pads for the family. So that was kind of my introduction back in the late 70s. As I said, I did not have any desire to run a machine. So I took a couple of years off after high school, worked for a paper mill, which obviously is a related industry. Again, found out that wasn't for me and went back to college, got a bachelor's degree in business and economics. After college, natural thing for me was find a job in the printing industry. So I did that and worked for a couple of years for a local printing company in sales. Walked through the door and they said, here's a business card, go at it, Tiger. No accounts, nothing. So I learned kind of the hard way, just knocking on doors. After 2 years, found out that there was another local company that I could make a heck of a lot more money. And I went there, worked for 5 years in printing again. And then after that, a executive search firm sought me out to be in sales management for another company. I did that for 3 years. And during that time, Mark, what I did is I would be on sales calls. I was a sales manager. I would be on sales calls with my salespeople, and I just started asking questions. What's missing in our region? What's missing in our area? And I kept hearing people repeatedly tell me that there was a lack of a good bookbinder or paper converter. And I'd leave those meetings and I'd have to research because I had no idea what that meant. And that was that had to be 1993, I believe it was. So I started my process of putting together a business plan in 93. It was in 1994. I got approval from a bank based on a business plan. I had a buddy who had a flatbed truck. We drove around the Midwest, bought equipment, put it on the flatbed truck, bought it back to Neenah, Wisconsin, rented a building, put the equipment in there. January 1st, 1995. Got our first order from my attorney, 50 books. So that's how Binding Edge started.
That's great. And it started with a need. You identified a need and filled the need, which is pretty interesting. And, you don't think of, I've worked in the past with a lot of people in the graphics industry and printing In fact, I grew up, I think I may have mentioned to you, in the greeting card business, although my family were distributors, but I was around manufacturers. We would go to the plants and things like that, so kind of familiar with all that. But you don't really think of like that. You look for a specific need to fill. I want to jump ahead maybe 20 years or so or in the early 2000s, I think, when you came into a situation where in order to grow and to keep up and to be profitable, you had to make a major investment in the company, which your advisors told you was not a great idea. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Absolutely. At the time, probably just in our city, there was 4 or 5 companies doing what I did. So there was one company, there was a great need to begin with, but then I started a second business, and then there were a couple of other people that started. Anyway, what I determined was I could continue to try to compete with these small guys. A couple of guys literally worked out of their garage, no overhead. I couldn't compete with them. So I did some research, worked with one of our vendors, and in the end, he convinced me to take a trip over to Germany. So my wife and I went to Germany, and they showed me a bookbinding machine that would punch and bind plastic spiral books. And at the time, most people were doing this by hand. Plastic spiral books at about 800 to 900 books an hour. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about taking a piece of PVC plastic and forming it into a coil and binding a book, it's pretty fast. So at that point in Germany, I signed the paper for this company to literally build for me a custom machine. This is wasn't something on a shelf. They literally had to build this for me. So it took close to a year to have this thing built. But I got back, and whether it was my banker, my accountant, I had an advisor at the time, they said, what were you thinking? Or what are you thinking? The size of your company, this is going to be $1 million for the machine. Then you have installation, and you have transportation, getting it from Germany to here. And I said, no, I've got this figured out, because honestly, I ran the numbers and it made sense. But I'll tell you, when it first arrived and that first payment had to be made, it was hard to sleep. It was difficult to sleep. But now I look back, if we wouldn't have done that, we would not be in business now. What that machine does with 2 people, my competitors would require between 7 and 9 people to put out what we can do in an hour with 2 people. So the automation is tremendous. If I wouldn't have done that, I honestly think we wouldn't be here today.
And I know that wasn't the last time you had to innovate through automation. And we'll talk about, we have a break coming up, but we'll talk about that after the break. So you've had some challenges. That was a big challenge. So competition from local people. My understanding is, Steve, that you're probably the primary bookbinder in the Midwest today. And we talked about the numbers. Is that a fair statement that you're primary or one of the primaries?
One of the primary, yes.
Yeah. And how many books a year do you think you bind?
Combination of different processes, probably about 4 million.
That's pretty amazing for small business in middle America. Hey,
Right.
With that, let's take a quick break, commercial break. Will be 60 seconds, and we'll be back very shortly with Founders Forum.
Steve Penkala founded Binding Edge nearly 30 years ago after recognizing a need for a reliable, creative, and forward-thinking binding and finishing company to serve printers and publishers across the Midwest and beyond. Today, the team at Binding Edge has a reputation for producing exceptional materials, providing meaningful employment, and giving back to the local communities. Learn more about Binding Edge's comprehensive services, competitive pricing, and top-tier customer service by visiting bindingedge.com.
Hello, we are back on Founders Forum, and we're talking to Steve Penkala of Binding Edge, Inc. out of Wisconsin. Steve, we were talking about, some challenges you had and what you had to do to overcome those challenges. I know another one that you've had over the years is employees, finding the right people and keeping them. Do you want to talk about that a minute? And then I know Ange likes to talk a lot about company culture, and she'll go a little deeper on that question with you.
Yeah, I mean, it really began finding good talent during the pandemic. We had some people that, let me just step back real quick. We were deemed essential. A lot of the books that we do are going to the government, they're federal regulations, they're things of that nature. So we were deemed essential, and that didn't sit well with a portion of my team. And we gave them the choice. We said, if you want to take time off and not come in, we get it. And some of those people just never came back. And our tenure at one time was 20 years, and now it's probably down to about 10 or 12. And following or coming out of the pandemic, the biggest thing that we faced here in our region in Northeast Wisconsin was any place I would drive down the interstate, there would be starting wages between $22 and $30 an hour and signing bonus of $5,000. Right. Well, in our industry, I always kind of thought to myself, I won't be around to see the minimum wage be at $15. Well, we quickly had to get to $15, and at that we couldn't find people. So, we are somewhere around the upper teens to lower 20s to get people through the door. And that was the biggest challenge, because I would have some of those people that the tenure they had would come to my door and say, hey, Steve, I can make X amount, and X amount was $10 more than I was paying them here. Right. And in my mind, I wanted to pay them that, but the moment I would do that, then there would be a line outside my door, because they all talk, we know that. Sure. And they would all want to raise. So that's been a real challenge. I'm really pleased to report in the past year and a half, that has changed. There's a lot more talent available. There's more people that are looking for work in our area. I'm not sure about your area, but it's encouraging, and we've seen that swing in the past 12 to, I would say, 14 months.
And I know Ann's going to want to get more into the employee issue, but you also, I know part of your solution to that in the pandemic was, again, use of automation to help handle that problem. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, great point, Mark. That was during that time. We had, I guess we were really blessed with cash flow, and it wasn't due to PPP or anything else. And so we invested close to $750,000 in equipment that, for example, we replaced a piece of equipment that took 2.5-3 hours to set up it took 15 minutes to set it up. And honestly, I could set it up. And where it would normally take on the old piece of equipment 2 or 3 people to run, one person can run it. So we added equipment that the setup was quicker and it required less manpower on it. And that's really served us well.
That's great. So, Ann, go ahead.
Yeah. So, Steve, that's so interesting. I mean, I think I love the way that you're looking at solutions to sort of a human problem in some ways, right? So during that time, and, I come from the place, as Mark said, of the human capital and labor and organizational design and company culture and all of that. So, you've got the challenge of initially finding the availability of talent, being able to pay them. But I'm also curious about on the retention side, right? So you're saying you had long tenures and maybe that shrunk a little bit, but both in an industry where on the outside looking in, and you shared a little bit about this before the show about, some people might perceive it as kind of a dying industry in the book binding industry, but it sounds like you've done a number of things, both in terms of how you approach that piece of it, right? The existing coinciding with digital technology, but also I love the stories that you're telling us about how you keep the culture and how you embody, it seems, servant leadership. You want to share a story with us about, what do you do to kind of make your staff feel welcomed and appreciated? Because I don't think a lot of owners are understanding that. There's a big push to return to office, and it's just making a bigger divide between employees and management. So tell us a little bit about that from your perspective.
Yeah, and just a great question. And the thing that we all know is the perception is going to be different with anybody on whether it's my production floor or on a different production floor. But you're right. For a long time, honestly, it's going to sound terrible to you, but for the longest time, and this was 25 years ago, I looked at my team out there as an asset. Well, they're not an asset. They're not a machine. And what I learned over the years is it might sound simple to you, but I get here between 5 and 5:30 in the morning with a cup of Starbucks, and I walk from workstation to workstation. And someone might want to chat and someone might not. And one day it's an issue with their child, or they had a car accident, whatever. So I intentionally take the time to walk around, and I encourage my two other supervisors. We're just not going to blow through this place and push numbers and expect people just to make money for us. We want to get to know them. We want to spend time with them, and they've bought into that. So that's one thing. Another thing that this morning I did was with my leadership team. I was up rather early, and
I was hoping you'd get to this. This is a great story, but go ahead.
I was up rather early. We'll just say 3 a.m. And I set up I guess I'll call it a kitchen back in our shipping and receiving area. And we made bacon and eggs and toast and hash browns and served juice and we did that. And you know what, guys, we're not trying to bribe people to perform for us. We just feel that it's our job to serve them, because what they do for us every day is amazing. What they do for us is, when we expect overtime, most of them don't, right? They work, they put the hours in. So once a month we put on our calendar just a different activity, whether it was this morning, it was breakfast. We do, well, the big one throughout the years, we'll do steaks and baked potatoes, and we'll serve them on white linen. So we just do different things like that. And like I said, some people kind of look at it as like, what's behind this, and what's really behind it is we truly, genuinely appreciate what they do for us.
That's, the term for that in today's world, Steve, I think, is conscious leadership. And it's really near and dear to my heart. You're shifting that mindset from looking at them as an asset to embodying servant leadership. So I think that's an amazing lesson. And I can't wait for all of our listeners that own and, found companies to kind of learn from that, because it's important more than ever, I think.
Yes, I agree.
Steve, looking ahead, because I know it's a business, it's a I don't want to say non-tech business, because you do use some advanced technology and innovation in your business, but it's a business of tangibles, which is one of the reasons I was really anxious to have you here, because we talk to a lot of business people you talk to today are doing consulting, or they're dealing with thinking, or they're dealing with technology, or they're dealing with less tangible things. And we still have the need, and it's one of the reasons why I mentioned to you we have this Manufacturers Forward Focus Forum to talk about what's going on in manufacturing as it comes back to America, because things still need to be made, which is why I'm thrilled to have you here today. Given that, where do you see, if this were October of 2026, it's 3 years from now, and you're looking back on the last 3 years, what would have to happen for you to feel that was a successful 3-year period in your life and in your business?
Well, when I think about the 3-year vision, and I guess even beyond, I'm just going to maybe digress a little bit. I always hoped that one of my sons would have a desire to be involved in the business. Our eldest son lives in Boston, and he has a job that he wouldn't have any interest in. Our younger son lives in Manhattan, and he actually produces commercials. So he was recently home, and during the course of his visit and over dinner and a couple glasses of wine, I said, "Hey, what about the business?" I just off the cuff, "What about the business?" He said, "Well, I never thought you would want me to run the business." So there's a possibility for that. But the biggest thing right now, I'm presently working on a transition plan. So in 3 years, what would that look like for me? I have a 10% owner in the business right now. We have a couple of other people that would like to invest as well. And in 3 years, you know what? I'd like to be done with the HR stuff, some of the safety stuff, some of the AR, the AP, some of the administrative stuff, and just go out and solve the customer's problems. That's what I'm best at. And I would be perfectly fine, Mark, if at that point I completely sold 100%, or if I just was a minority owner. But that's kind of my 3-year vision, my 3-year plan. And Ange and Mark, you're the first to know this. That much detail, because I haven't really talked to too many people about that. We all hear it's tough at the top, and I sit in my office, and I can't really share that with a lot of people, because I would hate to have a mass exodus because Steve's going to leave or he's going to be out of here in 3 years, and I've got a good team, and I wouldn't want that to happen.
I do need to
I'm
remind
not sure that answered your question.
You are sharing it with a lot of people.
I know. Well, my team, hopefully not.
Yeah, you'll have time to prepare them.
Anyway, but listen, it's a natural thing to think about. I don't think you have to worry.
It's a prudent thing to think about.
And you just said,
right.
What I heard you say is you want to stay engaged with the business, doing what you do best, or what I like to call your unique ability, which is serving the customer's needs. That's a great, not to use a word you didn't want to use, but it's an asset to the business that you want to be there. So I don't see that as a threat. That would actually encourage employees. I think that they're going to have a job for the foreseeable future, and that there might be, if not a dynasty, a legacy left as a result.
Right.
And we do just have about another minute. What do you like to do in your spare time? Because you kind of alluded to it earlier, but what do you do for fun?
Oh, goodness, you two. I absolutely love to cook. I can have the worst day. I can get home and I can just, not even a recipe. I can just start making stuff up, and that's my creativity.
We have something in common, because I love to eat.
Yeah.
You love to cook.
I have a feeling, Steve, you might have a new recruiting tactic. I think you might have a line of applications for people if they know they're going to get a home cooked, meal by the founder of the company. So I think you're doing all right. But yeah,
funny.
and I think you mentioned earlier Italian is your favorite.
It is
flavor.
yes.
So that
homemade pasta. I love making
wow,
homemade
pasta.
Very nice. Hey, we're almost out of time, but listen, you've said a lot here today. You've talked a lot about your business. You've talked about several times you had to pivot in the business, including the pandemic, like many of us. And you talked about a great future, and you talked about a way to incorporate your passion into the business while serving your ultimate customer, not your ultimate customers, but your customers who are your employees, which is really an amazing thing. So we really appreciate you having you here today, Steve, and wish you continued success. And we thank all of you for being here today on Founders Forum. And we hope that you'll listen next week for more stories of our founders and as they look to their futures. Thanks, and have a great week. Have a good one, Ange.